All right, gonna
Welcome
give it.
everybody. Yeah. So as people begin to join this meeting, why don't, if you can, drop in the chat where you're zooming in from and how are you feeling today? Just let us know you're there.
I like your suit, Poe, by the way.
Yeah.
Made me feel underdressed.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Hope I didn't outstage anybody. Yeah. Myself, I'm zooming in from Wallingford in Seattle right now. What about you, Connor?
Oh, I'm zooming in from Lake Forest Park at my home.
That's nice. Yeah. As we settle into this event, that's pretty cool. Yeah. Rachel's zooming in from U District. I'm glad that you're excited to learn about this. I find this is a really interesting thing we're going to do. Yeah, welcome to any new attendees to this meeting. We're going to be starting in just a few minutes. And for now, everybody can drop in chat where they're zooming in from. We're also going to be having a Padlet open where you can comment questions and stuff that you want to ask the speakers. And if we can get that link in the chat soon, you can go check that out.
All right, just a few minutes longer.
Yeah. One thing that I'm going to ask you guys is if everybody, I know that restaurants were a big thing that helped carry us through this pandemic, definitely being able to support the small businesses in our communities. So if everybody can drop their favorite local restaurant that they felt helped them keep them sane through the pandemic. For me, there's this ramen place in my house called Yoroshiku, and we definitely got takeout there more than we did before, and it was really good. Honor, do you have a favorite restaurant that you've been going to this pandemic?
Uh, I was honest. Okay, now I'm kind of like embarrassed because honestly, my favorite restaurant is like McDonald's. So it's definitely not helping out the local businesses, but it's so tasty. I love the Big Macs, bro. I can't help it.
Yeah, I mean, if it fills you up, what can you do? Okay, just one more minute now, but yeah, we're seeing Shumin in the CID, vegan Vietnamese food. That sounds really good. I'll probably have to try it eventually. Yeah, Dina, I think I've been to Rancho Bravo. They've got really nice burritos. So many places I'm gonna have to try eventually. Okay, so welcome everybody. We are pleased to welcome you to We the Innovators, Creativity in the Time of COVID-19. My name is Pose Tia, and I'm a youth advisor here at MOHAI. I am a Southeast Asian man with straight black hair, and I have dark eyes, and I'm wearing a black and white suit with a blue tie, and I'm sitting in front of an image of MOHAI on a sunny day.
And my name is Connor McCullum. I'm a light skin with black curly hair, sitting in a UW tracksuit. And just in my room is the background.
Yeah, so everybody, again, we're going to restate that welcome to We the Innovators, Creativity in the Time of COVID-19. This program will last about an hour and a half, and just a little breather on how to use the Q&A function. If you direct your gaze to the bottom of your screen, it hides between the participants button and the chat button. And using that, you can ask questions that can be answered by the panelists that we'll have later. We also have a Padlet where you can look at other information there and also type in questions. If we can get that link in the chat again, that would be nice, but you can also use that. You can email programs@mohai.org if you're calling in for questions as well. You can use the chat to share observations, resources, and ideas. But make sure to keep it civil. We'll also be recording and posting it online so you can send it to friends who weren't able to make it. And closed captioning can be turned on and off from the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window.
MOHAI is grateful that our community is positive, friendly, and supportive of one another. In that spirit, attendees are expected to exercise consideration and respect in your speech and actions, and disagreements are necessary to consider difficult questions, but they must remain respectful. We also ask that you engage with genuine curiosity and know that MOHAI does not condone acts and language that promote inequity or that disenfranchise or marginalize people, and we will remove participants from this program that engage in disrespectful discourse.
Before we begin the program tonight, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we gather today at MOHAI, well, in spirit, on the historic and contemporary lands of the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Elko Salish people. We acknowledge that the forced displacement of Native communities from this land while honoring the endurance of the Duwamish people who still live here. To this day, the Duwamish people have yet to receive federal recognition. We encourage you to visit the Duwamish Longhouse and Cultural Center in West Seattle to learn more.
We also want to note that this
I think Connor cut out a little bit there, but I'll just pick up for him.
with those who are calling for justice now. Additionally, we also want to acknowledge the recent shootings that have highlighted anti-Asian violence. MOHAI condemns acts that promote inequity or acts that disenfranchise or marginalize people and stands firmly on the side of inclusion, equity, and cultural empathy. As a history museum, we have the rich resource of the past to guide us, to help us to understand our present. By examining history together, we can learn from where we have been and imagine a better future.
Yeah. And Connor and I, along with other people in the chat, were members of the MOHAI Youth Advisory Board. And we're basically a group of teens from in Seattle who are working to make museums more accessible for youth and generally make it a more friendly experience for youth as a whole. And it's great. We're accepting applications too soon if we can get some info about that in the chat too. But now we're going to segue into our first speaker, which is Meilani Marandi from the CID Coalition. So Meilani is an Asian American creative and community organizer working at the Wing Luke Museum and organizing with the CID Coalition. She received her bachelor's in arts history and arts leadership from Seattle University and will attend the University of Washington to pursue her master's in musology in the fall. Meilani, is there anything you want to say about yourself?
Just hi, Meilani Mandery. I'm so thankful to be here. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a young Asian woman wearing glasses. I have shoulder-length brown hair, and I'm wearing a red t-shirt that says Chinatown is not for sale.
Awesome. So we're going to start out with one question, which is a little more personal, but how do you feel you have been personally affected by the pandemic? And adding on to that, how do you feel your work with the CID Coalition has been affected by the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've been extremely lucky. I haven't lost any folks close to me. I haven't gotten sick myself. I've been really lucky to be able to go visit family back home. So all of those things, plus being able to work from home, all of those have been really, really, I've been grateful for it. And in terms of how it's affected CID Coalition, we used to meet in person, organize in person at events and host community events in person, and it's just been a little harder to get that same momentum up while in quarantine. But we've been able to do a lot of the work that we've been doing for years virtually. Originally we're meeting every week. I think we've moved down to once every 2 weeks, which is a little more manageable for folks. But we've been able to like keep on top of a lot of the anti-displacement and like community forward work that we've been doing.
Yeah, that's great. And now going back to some of that work that the coalition does do, I know that a big part of your ideology is to support vulnerable communities, especially in the CID. How has that work been impacted by the pandemic, and how are you looking to go forward and reinvent the way of this kind of activism to be better prepared for the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So much of CID Coalition's work is fighting gentrification and displacement in the neighborhood. And while virtual, that looks like virtual calls to action, whether that's through social media or our email listserv, but letting people know what's going on in the neighborhood, and telling folks how to contact people in charge, like such as like the ISRD board or their city council members. So we've really just been connecting people with these opportunities to really share their voice and say what they want in the neighborhood. Because right now we're looking at so much gentrification, such as coda condos, which are gentrifying the neighborhood. Rather than getting affordable housing, we're getting luxury condos that no one can afford, and people are getting priced out. And there's so much anti-houselessness sentiment in the neighborhood, whether that's from nonprofits or business owners. And it's been really hard to see how unfairly folks are treated. And there's currently sweeps going through encampments all across Seattle, but also specifically in the CID. And part of the work we've been doing with that vulnerable population is helping provide resources. CID Coalition hosted a fundraiser that raised money to support mutual aid efforts in the neighborhood. And yeah, just calling attention to the sweeps and telling people where they can support the actual work that needs to be done, rather than just pushing people away.
Mm-hmm. I know the pandemic has brought a lot of challenges to a lot of people in this. And I was wondering that after facing these challenges for the most part, is there anything that you guys wish you did differently starting from the start?
Yeah, I think a lot of movement work it needs to be intentional. And we've just been across the board being put in situations where we have to be reactionary, like something bad happens and we need to react to that. So like with hindsight, it would be great to like know about those things ahead of time, just so we don't feel like we're stretched so thin, that we have time to move at the pace of trust to actually like build with community and talk about these things before they spiral. Something that is in that vein that we have been doing. So CID Coalition and other community members were part of a coalition called Decrim CID, Decriminalize CID, that's been doing a lot of work for years around safety and safety and display or like anti-police efforts, anti-surveillance. So that is something that has been in process for years and has been really nice to be able to lean back on that work that has already been done, especially now that with a lot of the anti-Asian hate rhetoric going on right now, a lot of people are unfortunately calling on police and other forms of state violence to do that support work. Whereas because we had this work from our communities and other BIPOC communities already, we can support that. But yeah, so that's an example of something that like we did have in our back pocket, but it would have been nice to, with hindsight, everything's easier.
Yeah, I think that's super important. And now just one last question that's going to relate more to your work at the wing. Luke, I know that from doing work at a museum myself, there's been a lot of challenges in sustaining this kind of thing in the pandemic environment. And there's a lot of new challenges that arise. I was wondering that what's something that you want in the museum industry to change going forward permanently after the pandemic?
Yeah, so for context, I work at the Wing Luke Museum in our education program called Youth Can, which is a youth program for high school age students. It's a free art program, and I've been there for maybe 2 years now, and we've definitely gone through it with the pandemic. The wing has had to close a few times. We're back open now, open on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So come by the CID, stop in at the wing, support some local businesses while you're at it. But yeah, so we've had to close. My program's been online for the last year and will continue to be. But we've changed in a lot of ways in mostly putting content and programming online. And I think something great with that is you don't have to be in Seattle to enjoy and learn from the wing now. Like you can be anywhere and access all this great information. And I think that's something that I would really like to see going forward across the board for all museums, is to make your content more accessible, and free online would be great. Because not everyone has the access of showing up in person, or thinking about different accessibility, whether that's having an interpreter or transcripts in all of your like online programming. That's another thing that we've learned through this pandemic, which we should have all been doing beforehand too. So yeah, that's I think access is one of the biggest things that I would like to see change and move forward.
Yeah, I think that's super cool, especially with the importance that museums and these, especially cultural, historical museums, they have on young people. That's a really big impact that we can have on the youth who are working to build a better world for tomorrow. And I think investing in those kind of things is really important.
For sure.
Well, thank you, Meilani. Thank you for answering your questions. We're going to segue back to you when we're to interview some questions for both the CID Coalition members. But right now, can we have Marlon Herrera? Hi, Marlon. So Marlon is a community organizer with the Chinatown International Districts Coalition, or hashtag Humbaos Not Hotels. With a background in policy and planning, Marlon is dedicated to justice, equity, and self-determination for the CID and the rest of the Coast Salish Islands. Marlon is also a Sound Transit Project Manager and the Seattle Parks Commissioner. Hi, Marlon.
Hey, Poe. Hey, Connor. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So one question that we have to start out with is just how has the process of community organization as a whole, how has it been changed by the pandemic?
Sure. Oh, and sorry, I forgot one thing just for accessibility. I am a Filipino cisgender man with hair swept to one side, and I'm currently standing in my room with some postcards up and a plant and pictures behind me. I use he, him pronouns. Nice to be here. But yeah, how has the process of community organizing been changed by the pandemic? Though it's forced us to be apart, I feel like it's really tightened the bonds of our community together. I mean, right at the start, we had to combat that anti-Asian sentiment when COVID first hit the streets. And then we had to get right to action with mutual aid. We're partnering with a lot of other grassroots groups, cash assistance, food deliveries, what folks need to survive. We're also having to fight harder for unsheltered neighbors. And that's something that you heard Meilani talk about. Our housing system has been very broken, and our shelters have been stretched past capacity. And with COVID, it's just a whole nother ballgame. And then we're also working with other folks in our neighborhood just to do, as individuals, not as the coalition. We're really stretched thin, just like food deliveries to our elders, just coordinating other events, coordinating policy about anti-gentrification work. And then last but not least, of course, is we can't forget about the uprisings that happened after the murder of George Floyd. It really brought together all these grassroots collectives that's really multicultural, intersectional. And to this day, we still continue to fight for Black and Indigenous lives.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. I think it's really important to know when the process gets harder, it's important to know what's worth fighting for at the moment, because sometimes you can stretch yourself a little too thin. I know that Meilani mentioned gentrification before, but kind of briefly. I know that that's sometimes a pretty confusing term to a lot of people. Do you mind going into depth a little about what gentrification is and how it's been impacting us in Seattle?
Yeah, sure thing. I'd love to. Gentrification, just what many definitions will talk about is that when there's an influx of wealthier folks coming in, and in the American case, always wealthier, whiter folks coming in, it raises the price of everything, not just food, but also rent. And also the competition for the real estate really heats up. And what happens is folks who've lived there for generations and really built a community are pushed out. But I think that's a narrow definition. If we think about what it means to be at home, we go to home for the holidays, to be with family, to experience that love and that warmth. Birds travel halfway around the world to find their home, to start a new family. And home for us is somewhere where we thrive. And I'm just afraid that gentrification is just an ending of one of the few places for working class POC folks in the city to truly thrive. I know we can dive into redlining and all the racist housing policies of the past, but this just continues that legacy of putting the burdens of the city and the built environment on Black, Indigenous people, color, and the working class.
I see. And can you tell me a little, I'm really interested in the hashtag, which is Humbbells Not Hotels. You have a little story about how that originated?
Absolutely, yeah. Uncle Bob Santos back in the day was a previous generation of community organizers and activists really fighting displacement, including the development of the Kingdom and what is today's Stadium District, what actually literally wiped out half of the neighborhood at the time. He was a part of another intercultural activist group known as the Gang of Four. I don't have quite enough time to go into all of that, but if you haven't heard of them, I suggest you do a quick Google search on your phone, save some reading for later. But yeah, what Uncle Bob Santos delivered, even though we still have that Stadium District, is some protections in the neighborhood to preserve our small businesses and our culture and the unique Asian culture. Also brought us a health clinic, a lot of affordable housing developments, and a nonprofit that to this day continues to focus on affordable housing and bringing this community that we have together, where, like I said, immigrants, Black, Indigenous folks, working class folks, folks who were left out by a lot of very exclusionary policies back in the day, found this as a place where they can thrive.
Wow, that's super cool. I'll definitely go look that up later. But now trying to tie all this back to the pandemic, how do you feel that gentrification, especially in the CID, has been changed by the pandemic? And has it been strengthened, weakened, a little bit in between?
Yeah, that's a really good question, especially since a big part of the coalition's work is fighting gentrification, both in the community and in City Hall. And when it comes to gentrification, disaster gentrification is a very well-researched thing. It happened in Hurricane Katrina, and there is data to show that even 10 years after, developers are taking advantage of crises, fluctuations in the real estate market, communities really stretched thin and being unable to fight for themselves. the profit margins that they can make by turning around places that have been devastated. That is disaster gentrification, and it's something that we have had to raise the alarm bells over, and it's continuing to happen. I have one example I'd like to share where a large-scale developer was lobbying the city to get approvals to build new developments in the neighborhood, and wanted to do it at the beginning of the pandemic virtually. Now, especially in the CID, we have special protections that demand public involvement, and we have certain times we've packed the room, and that really doesn't work in over virtual meetings. Because a lot of folks in the CID, especially our elders, they lack these digital literacy skills, English proficiency, and perhaps even access to the web. And that's one small example of how developers try and take advantage of a crisis to advance their profit interests.
Wow, that's super interesting. And like, yeah, whenever there's a disaster, you start to think about like, oh, we've been living through this historic time. There's always these implications that happen to the places that are close to us, and you don't always realize. Yeah, and what would you say that the biggest challenge for you specifically, in either in your personal life or in your CID work, was due to the pandemic?
Yeah, Poe, that kind of has me at a loss. I think in my life personally, and I know a lot of folks in the coalition, it's not just the health crisis and the uprising, the fight for Black lives, it's also us worrying about our family. It's also us worrying about a place to go home and paying the rent tomorrow, putting food on the table, and just the stress of everyday life. And I'm going to be honest, the biggest hurdle I think is just avoiding that burnout.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And also, when like, there's always an importance, like when you do all this work in the community, you also have to take care of yourself, or else there won't be anybody there to help the community, you know?
Absolutely. And I think this demand for a 24/7 time and to always be productive, that's just feels frankly super capitalistic. And I think that taking care of yourself is truly radical.
I totally agree with that. Well, thank you, Marlon. That was amazing. You can stay on screen though, because we're going to bring Meilani back up and ask you two some more general questions about the CID Coalition and more of your work together. Okay, so I'm just going to ask right now about more of the goals of the CID Coalition. And I'm asking if they've been impacted in like a broader, more planning sense for the future. And now that the pandemic's starting to end, how do you guys feel you might go forwards and try and change your plans for the future?
I can hop in real quickly. One thing I do want to point out is that this virtual environment is really nothing new for us. I know some folks in the coalition, myself included, have been part of a coast to coast, about a dozen or so cities across Canada and the United States of Chinatown organizers coming together, sharing our knowledge and lived experiences. And that was obviously virtual. We've only been together 2 or 3 times. And I'm hoping that this more accessible way of reaching folks in the community continues. But beyond that, the reckonings we face over health, over race, over the broken economic system, I just hope that we build a little bit more empathy and remind us of our humanity and why we're here.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add on to that, Meilani?
No, I think Marlon got it. Yeah, we working virtually, while it has its obvious limitations, I think we haven't, as a coalition, lost too much.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And a little more serious question that I'm going to be asking is, we all know that there have been a lot of recent anti-Asian hate crimes, and we also know that this isn't anything new for you guys and for everybody in that district as a whole and the community in general. But what does the CID coalition plan to do about the recent rise alongside the ones historically, and what's the plan to try and help out those affected and make the public feel more safe?
Yeah, I think one thing that CIDO Coalition's has always done is political education. And I think right now we need to work on reframing that conversation around AAPI hate, because right now it's so focused on the actions of individuals, like one person hurt an Asian person. And yes, that is terrible, but it erases so much of the larger harms that our communities put through, whether that's deportation, police violence, or criminalization of sex work. Anti-Asian hate is US imperialism. So it's a lot of it we need to be, as a community, not letting the state co-opt our movement and not letting them co-opt our suffering to expand their own power. Right now, I'm seeing a lot of people using this as justification to advocate for more policing and more surveillance. And we as a community know that that's not what we need. We need resources, not more police. So I think that's something that CID Coalition is well equipped to do, is to educate folks within our community as to see, like, this isn't the only option. Like, we have more options and we have more power together.
Yeah, thank you, Meilani. That's awesome. I also want to add on to, but not as a coalition, but as individuals. We've been part of the conversation in the neighborhood with all the other orgs, talking about what we can do. We've shown up to do like community night watches and stuff like that. And just being there and a part of the community and being there to grieve and to take action, I think is a huge part of what we do, is just, being that rock in the community.
Thank you guys both for that answer. I know it's been a very troubling time for a lot of people recently, with the added stress of the pandemic being added on to the recent rise in hate crimes. And it's really good to hear that the community is coming together and trying to reassure people at everything. Okay. So before we ask a couple more questions, I'm just going to reinforce that both Marlon and Meilani right now, we're open to questions from the audience. And if you want to, you can go down to the bottom, hit the Q&A box and ask some questions and we'll get them over. But one question that I do see on the Padlet, though, that I can ask both of you is, what is the process that you or your group, the CID Coalition, do to come up with new ideas?
There's so much going on all the time. I don't feel like we ever sit down and have to think of something to respond to, because there's really just so much all the time. But our general structure, like, we meet twice a week. We usually build out an agenda at the meeting and go over things that are happening in the neighborhood, and then broader, whether that's we need to call out the ISRD for something, or we're working with the Coast to Coast Chinatown and planning an event. So, like, there's always things. Marlon, if you want to talk more on that.
Yeah. I think something I love about the coalition, grassroots organizing in general, is how our leadership is super horizontal. There's not really a power structure. And so if you have an idea and you want to make it happen, we make it happen. We come together, we support each other. And when we need a break, also that's important to know. It's like folks step in and out, and it's just really fluid. And most of the time too, we're responding to issues. And that's honestly the biggest challenge to having. We have a lot of great creative ideas to really want to do, but when there's a developer trying to build luxury housing just down the street, we got to drop everything and work on that.
Yeah, priorities. Yeah. One probably final question for you guys. I know the whole name of the game for this program is innovation. And I was wondering if you guys if you had to give one example of the way that you think the CID Coalition innovated that you want to share, and it's like a lesson for the future, what would that be?
I can share a little bit about our youth event called Kanji and Community, which I'm really proud of because I did some work on that.
I went there.
Yes, that's how I know Poe. So love that brought us together. But we've had teach-ins both in the past, but also virtually. And I think this one was really successful in that we got to connect with youth and ask them, like, what's what they care about for the neighborhood. It was a partnership with Seattle Public Library, and we hosted the virtual teach-in. I think it was like October of last year. But the whole point of the teach-in was to talk about topics such as solidarity, gentrification, racism, and community safety without police presence. And I think that was innovative in the way that it was a virtual thing, so we had a lot larger reach than we normally would have. And I think a shortcoming of a lot of virtual teach-ins is there's not a whole lot of follow-up. And with this event specifically, we wanted to follow up. So we created a zine that had all the curriculum and all the information that we presented at the teach-in, and we had that available for students. We sent that out with some CID Coalition and SPL merch, sent all that out to folks at home so they could like have something tangible from the virtual teach-in.
Yeah.
Marlon, what do you?
Yeah, and Meilani's been a rock star making that happen, you know, like it was so cool. And that's another example of like, she had this awesome idea and we supported her and she made it happen. And thanks for doing that, Meilani. Another thing she made happen that we killed it with is also just fundraising for mutual aid. That's especially in the virtual environment. I mean, we've always asked for money here and there to kind of support, you know, the stuff we do to pay for food at our community events. But with how extreme the crises are right now, raising a couple $1,000 to directly give to folks basic needs is just so cool. That's another thing Meilani over there is killing it at.
Yeah, I'll just say that I went to the Kanji community thing. I thought it was super cool. I feel like I learned a lot, and adding on to like the physical stuff that happened, I took some of those resources and I went to the Asian Student Union at my school, which I'm a part of. And I had like a little meeting on gentrification that I gave to like 20, 30 or so kids. And I thought it was it was a great way to kind of pass on the knowledge. And
That's so cool.
I'm thankful for that. It's a good experience. All right. And one final question from the audience is, what can we Seattleites do to support the CID Coalition?
That's a tough question right now, just because we're running with our heads cut off at the moment. But I'd say we are just asking right now for solidarity and to show up for the community. I think the question should be, what can we do to support the CID, not just the CID Coalition.
Small businesses.
Yeah, showing up to small businesses. If you see anti-Asian hate out there, just, you know, stop it, do something about it. And every time you see an opportunity, and if you're willing and able to give mutual aid, not just dollars, but time or stuff you have laying around the house, please do.
Yeah, going off of that, I think throughout the pandemic, it's been a lot of like small business forward messaging, and I think that is great and definitely is supports our neighborhood. But I think in addition to that, like looking at things that just regular people need. So not the business people, but just people. So I really want to second what Marlon said about mutual aid. Yeah, I think the houseless community in the CID get so much hate. And that's existed beyond Asian hate too. It's just a lot of classism and a lot of just anti houseless sentiment coming from nonprofits and the businesses and really everyone. So I think that is a really great place to start if you're looking to support the community, because that is our community as well, and it's a community that is often ignored. So spoilers, I guess. CID Coalition is working with Coast to Coast Chinatowns to host an event, I think at the end of this month or maybe in June, so watch out. But we're gonna host a bit of a cleanup around the encampments, because people there that are living there deserve to live there and deserve a nice trash-free environment. So we're going to do what we can to hopefully clean that up. But follow us on Instagram. I think that's a pretty accessible place. We also have a website. Thank you for sending that in the chat. Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Marlon. Thank you, Meilani. It was great being able to talk to you guys and ask you some questions. And yeah, everybody say thank you. And round of applause virtually. Clapping. Okay.
Thanks, Poe. Thanks, Connor.
All right, so if we can get the Padlet up on screen right now, we're going to do a little bit of talking about that. What you're looking at right now is the Padlet. It's basically a way for all the communities watching this. You can drop questions. You can also read the guidelines. And if we scroll down a little bit, we can see there's some examples of some other innovation that we found that we weren't able to include in this panel. But we can see there's Guava to the People, and it's a group who has been selling Cuban-based goods on the weekends. Free large tamales, authentic tamales at Green Lake, and they started giving out free flowers to healthcare workers. There's a North Wales Film Forum, and they've been able to have a really nice switch into the virtual film streaming environment to keep up the whole jig. And yeah, we're putting this out there so all the audience knows that if they have a story of a business that they think has innovated, they can go down there and go ahead and start sharing it and maybe give some more coverage to some businesses that really deserve it in this tough situation. Yeah, and the link's in chat if you guys want to go over there right now. And otherwise, I'm going to let Connor take it away from now.
All right, thank you, Poe. So now we are going to ask some questions to Lexi Walls, and Lexi Walls received her BS from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and her PhD from the University of Washington, where she is currently a scientist. She has co-authored 28 scientific publications and provided the research foundation for 2 clinical trials, including the next generation vaccine targeting SARS-CoV-2 and the COVID-19 pandemic. So very impressive. And is there anything else that you want to talk about on that? Introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks Connor and Poe and MOHAI Youth for having me, and also thanks to Marlon and Meilani. That was awesome to listen to all your work. My name's Lexi. I use she, her pronouns. I have blonde curly hair. I'm sitting in a laboratory with a bookshelf and a plant behind me right now.
All right, so our first question is, how are you specifically involved in the development of COVID vaccines?
Yeah, so I've actually been working on coronaviruses for 6 years now. And in the past year, I've really shifted my whole focus to trying to develop a vaccine that we think is, affordable and scalable and that we can share to the entire world. So we really started working on this last January, and we're really happy to say that all of our hard work is paying off, and that we have a vaccine in clinical trials, and we're really anxiously awaiting to see the data and see how it's doing in clinical trials. We really started, in the laboratory right here. We thought of the idea of what we wanted this vaccine to be. We tested it first in the lab, then in animal models, and then at every step of the way, it's worked better than we kind of could have imagined. And so now it's in humans, which is incredible.
And that's very exciting. I know you've probably spent a long time preparing and studying for a global pandemic, but how is an actual pandemic different than what you prepared for?
Yeah, I don't think anyone was prepared for the past year and a half, and even going forward, what the next year and a half or more is going to look like. In theory, we always knew that coronaviruses had what we call pandemic potential, and kind of the reasons that we knew that are that since 2000, actually 2 other coronaviruses that had never before been able to infect humans kind of emerged into our human, we call it like disease sphere. So the first one is called SARS, or severe acute respiratory syndrome. That was first discovered in 2002. And then the second is called MERS, or Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, and that was discovered in 2012. And so with both of these coming, in quick succession, we always knew that this was possible, but I don't think anyone really understood how it could spread so quickly. We were always getting on flight before the pandemic. We were always getting on flights. We're always sharing. We're kind of a global world, which is incredible, but it has some devastating consequences when something like COVID-19 happens. So yes, we were prepared. Yes, we knew that it could happen. And one example of how prepared we were is, we're a year and a half after the discovery of this virus, and we have in the US 3 amazing vaccines that are doing better than anyone could have imagined. So I think that's the best sign of preparedness that we could have had, and we're really lucky.
And how did the pandemic change your research?
Yeah, we definitely focused, we're totally focused on vaccines and therapeutics. So not only do we have vaccines in clinical trials, but we also have some therapeutics, one type of therapeutic called an antibody in clinical trials. And so the goal is really to be able to both treat the disease and also with a vaccine to prevent the disease. And I would also say, we're all working way more than we were before. Every single day, we are learning things that, the whole world needs to know, right? We're learning things about this virus, about how vaccines work, about how our immune systems work. And we have to generate that data and that information as fast as possible, and then also share it as fast as we possibly can so that, everyone can benefit. And
how does your team develop questions or ideas? And then how do you test those?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And I think one of the cool things, and you even mentioned it in your question, is we do work as a team. So, in the lab specifically that I work in, there's, about 14 of us, but we have tens of hundreds of collaborators all over the world, some at UW campus, some, literally everywhere. And so we're constantly on Zoom meetings, constantly sharing our ideas. And so it's definitely a global effort to really come up with these ideas and then test them. And then, we put our ideas out into the world and have people, verify them and check the data. And that gives us all a lot of, we can really trust the science that's coming out. As far as what we do, I'm a biochemist by training. So what does that mean? That means that I work with proteins. So proteins are basically macromolecules that do the daily needs that your cells in your body have to do. And so what we've basically done is we've taken the proteins that are present in SARS-CoV-2, or the causative agent of COVID-19, and we've made a vaccine out of them. And we've taken these proteins and we've teamed up with something called the Institute for Protein Design here at the University of Washington, where they can design what's called a nanocage. I wish I had a picture of it here, but we basically display proteins from SARS coronavirus 2 on this nanocage to give a really potent and strong immune response when you get this vaccine. So that's really the work we've been doing.
Wow. So I know it's been a very worldwide pandemic. So how did different health organizations collaborate on the process of the vaccine, and what did that look like?
Yeah, it definitely has been a worldwide effort. And I'll say, that this really started, when the virus was first discovered in Wuhan, China. The first thing that really started us off on this global sharing was that Chinese scientists sequenced the virus and immediately shared that publicly. And this allowed really the whole world to set off on the ground running and to really start to understand, study, and generate vaccines against this virus. So that kind of started us off on this global sharing endeavor. So one thing that I can point to specifically that's totally changed in the pandemic is, so scientific information sharing. We used to go through a really lengthy process of submitting your ideas in kind of a package that we call a paper. And this would go through rigorous peer review, and then it would be from the time you submit to the time it's public, it could be up to a year. That's all changed with the pandemic for good. What we now do is we submit that package, that paper that we call, which has data and figures and pictures and all of these things. And we submit it to a public, basically, archive. And we allow all scientists to look at this data before it's been peer reviewed, and to even publicly peer review it themselves. The papers still go through the full peer review process, but the data is out there up to a year earlier, which really allows us to share things at what we call pandemic speed, or as fast as possible.
Okay, and how could COVID variants affect the vaccine effort?
Yeah, so this is definitely something that we're all thinking as, we're hopefully getting access to vaccines, and more and more people are getting vaccinated, which is really fantastic, because vaccination is the best way that we know as a society to prevent disease. And it also doesn't come with, some of the negatives of social distancing that I'm sure we've all felt over the last year. And the virus is mutating. So viruses typically mutate. But one of the greatest things that we're seeing is that these vaccines that we currently have are so strong and durable that in most cases, they're still up to 80 to 90% effective against these new variants. So I think we all can take some positive news that these vaccines are really, really powerful and are really doing their job, which is fantastic. And we need to get them global and to as many people as we possibly can.
And as a research scientist, what do you feel like your role in helping reduce vaccine anxieties is?
Yeah, I think everyone has a role in reducing vaccine anxieties. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to your family members. And I really think the key is just to start a conversation. I'm in a really lucky and privileged spot that I am a scientist who's happens to be working on the virus that's causing this global pandemic. And so I feel kind of a responsibility to share as much knowledge as I can, and give people as much reassurance as I can that these vaccines are safe, and not only are they safe, but they're also protective and helping not just you, but your community members. So not everyone is able to get vaccinated, and so we, as many people who can be vaccinated as possible, should. So I definitely try my best to share, on my social media feeds with my friends as much information as I can to say, hey, if you need someone to talk to, and even here, if any of you need someone to talk to get information about these vaccines, I'm happy to take a step in and do that. But I think we all can be talking to everyone about vaccines, and you never know what conversation will change someone's plan or idea.
Building off of that, what would you tell someone who's hesitant about getting the vaccine?
I would first ask them why. A lot of times, people, who have disagreements, they're often shut down immediately. And oftentimes they just want to hear that their concerns are heard. And so I would start by asking them, what is making you nervous? And then once I would listen to that, I would see, are there examples that I can say, either dispute why they're nervous, or say, that also makes me nervous. I don't like shots. No one really likes a shot. So, I would try and, connect with them on their nerves, because I think everyone's a little nervous when they're getting a new shot, and that's totally okay. But definitely try and listen to their needs or their questions and concerns, and try to connect with them is really the best and only way we can do that.
In the journey to be
Connor, I think you cut out there for a little bit.
Oh no.
I can ask the question for him.
Sorry about that, my bad.
All right. Oh, you go ahead then. It's okay, yeah.
The question was, in the journey to becoming a research scientist, is there anything that surprised you or was unexpected about what the work is like, and what do you wish more people knew or understood about your field of study?
Okay, that's a big question. I guess I would start by saying, I didn't always know that I wanted to be a scientist. And this, it wasn't something that from age 5, I knew I wanted to be a scientist. It was sort of something I discovered along the way. I realized, logic makes a lot of sense to me, and I like thinking through things logically. I also realized that I liked the unknown. Research is truly about learning things no one else in the world knows. And I don't think that many people think of research that way. We're truly trying to figure things out that no one knows. And that's really exciting. That's really cool. And honestly, a lot of my job is fun. I'm constantly trying to think of new ideas and engage with people and say, hey, what do you think of that? Like, I saw this weird thing. Have you ever seen this weird thing? It's really a social job, which I think is also something most people don't think of when they think of scientists, that we're all kind of working here together. So those are the things I would say about what did I not expect about being a research scientist. And I kind of forgot the last part of your question. Do you mind repeating the last part?
What do you wish more people knew or understood about your field of study?
I think one thing that that we all kind of learned with the pandemic is that you never know what the most important science or field of science is going to be. And because of that, we need really diverse ideas, we need diverse fields of study, and that also means we need funding for areas of research that at this moment you may not be able to imagine a reason why. Before 2020, not very many people studied coronaviruses, but we're lucky that we and many others did, because it allowed us to be prepared for this pandemic. But if we didn't have basic scientific funding for these kind of broad questions, or these at the time what seemed like inconsequential questions, we wouldn't have the knowledge that was necessary to get us to this point in the pandemic where we have successful vaccines. So I think that's probably the most important thing, is just broad scientific pursuit and funding and questioning.
Okay, thank you very much. Poe, is there any audience questions on the Padlet?
I don't believe so, but I did ask, did you ask the question about what's the role to reduce the hesitancies?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to share about your work, or anything that you wish that would be out there for people to know about the process so it's as transparent as possible?
I think something that, you all are now listening to someone who works on vaccines, and to really know that, at every step of the way, whether it's the initial discovery, whether it's the people who are in the clinical trials, whether it's the people bottling your vaccine, whether it's the people administering your vaccine, we are all normal people that you could see on the street, and we're all wanting to engage more with the community and to share our knowledge as much as possible to really help people, be excited about being vaccinated, and also just know everything they need to know about this pandemic and moving forward from the pandemic. So I think just recognizing that scientists are human, and we also want to help as much as possible. And I guess the last thing, I did realize I have this on my desk that you can have cute little stuffed animals of COVID-19. So if you ever want to know what the virus looks like, this is a not real view of it.
I see we have an audience question. What is the process going to look like of getting vaccines to the whole world?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and a lot of people are discussing what that means. But in general, what that means is vaccines like ours, and there are many other what we're calling second generation vaccines, which are much cheaper than the current ones, much more what we call temperature stable. So the vaccine we created can sit out at room temperature for 30 days, for a month, and have no detriment to its functionality. So this allows us to ship, worldwide without expensive freezers, or it allows us to get to remote or rural places. And also, once these second generation vaccines get through clinical trials and are shown to be just as good and effective as the current ones, they can be distributed everywhere for cheaper, for less, faster. And so it's a process of organization and just having the material to go do it. That's a great question and something we're all pushing for.
Okay, is that the end of our questions, Poe?
I believe so. Thank you so much, Lexi, for extending this hand and talking a lot about vaccines. It's definitely an important stage if we want to get back to some sort of normalcy. And thank you. We really appreciate it all.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Okay, so now as we begin to wrap up our program, just extend a warm thank you to all of our speakers as a whole in the chat, and thank them for their time. Thank you guys. Thank you, Marlon. Thank you, Meilani. Thank you, Lexi, for your time. And it's been great asking you questions. Now we're going to post a survey link in the chat. If you have any comments on the program, if you want to give us feedback, get that in the chat right now. I think it's in the chat. And you can join us next month for our next program, which is called History Cafe, How Railroads Brought a Checkerboard Landscape to the Northwest, on Wednesday, May 19th at 6:30 p.m. And the link's going to be in the chat as well. And yeah, and the MOHAI Youth Advisors as a whole, we're also working on a website called Rainy Day History, and you can look out for that soon.
And public programs like these are made possible with your support, so please consider making a gift or becoming a member to support future programs and help sustain the museum beyond the impact of the pandemic closure. And with all of that, thank you for coming. Have a good afternoon and stay safe and healthy.
Yeah, thank you everybody, and we'll see you at the next event, hopefully. Goodbye.
Thank you.